Today, most leaders are so focused on survival that they don't even dare to dream of being able to win praise from their employees or truly find a way to consistently manage both their time and their energy. However, this might not be as out of reach as it seems, and our guest today will be showing us how. I'm Jane Singer, and it's great to have you as part of our global community of industry leaders here on A Seat at the Table. Today we have Herdis Pala Palsdottir joining us. Herdis is co-founder of Opus Futura and a frequent lecturer on the future of work, as well as having sat on many management boards. She champions the concept of self-leadership as a concept that senior executives can use to become more effective team leaders, but also to improve the quality of their work life and even life outside of work. In this podcast, Herdis will discuss small changes that managers could make to be the best manager their employees ever had, why we need to look at energy management as well as time management, and the next big trend in human capital and how it might impact organizations. Most organizations realize that having the right people in the right roles is now fundamental to surviving, let alone thriving. However, finding these people can be a lot more challenging than you'd think. That's why leading corporations and even smaller organizations turn to AsiaNet consultants. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. So if you need to recruit new talent, or you think that you might be doing that soon, head on over to their website. That's AsiaNetConsultants.com, AsiaNetConsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Now let's sit down with Herdis and find out what we can do to be better self-leaders as well as team leaders. Herdis, thank you so much for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. I really appreciate I really appreciate your taking the time. I think that what you're talking about is really top of mind to so many people right now around the world. It's become very challenging to be a leader. We're facing uncertain times, recruitment of staff and retaining staff has been very challenging. I'm interested in what you say about leaders aspiring to be the best manager an employee ever had. What can leaders do to achieve that? What should they be doing differently?
Yeah, well, this is a big topic, like you say, and when I phrase it like this, I'm just kind of encouraging leaders and managers to, like I say, look in the mirror once in a while, just to reflect on how they're doing. I think it has really never been as challenging to be in a leadership or management position as it is today, but also probably never more important than now. We have research after research about, employees leaving due to their relationship with their manager. Companies and workplaces are, looking at, they have a harder time attracting and retaining employees. So management and building this relationship with the people is so important. And it's so important to be always looking into kind of what is happening, both in the external and internal environment of workplaces, looking into all kinds of trends to see how you have to adapt your management approach. We can talk about the generations, we can talk about, hybrid working, we can talk about all kinds of things, and it all requires managers to adapt their management approach. So I think it's very important to always think about how you can be the best manager people have had, because that is what people are going to remember.
Oh, absolutely. Now, do you feel that means taking a more personalized approach? In other words, you talk about different generations, you talk about people working in hybrid work situations. Does that mean that as a manager, you need to, I don't want to say customize, but in a sense, tailor how you respond to each employee? Or would you be just adapting an overall approach for everybody on the team?
I think a little bit of both. I think you have to tailor it up to a point, because individualism is always also on the rise. So people want to feel special. We can go online and order all kinds of things and have it customized for ourselves, whether it's colors or something else. And we want the same in the workplace. We want someone to really look at us not only as employee, but as an individual. So I think that requires a lot from managers and leaders. So, and I think overall management needs to be more human. And sometimes make joke of, because my master's is in human resource management. But I think we should call it human beings management instead, because that's what it's really about. Because if you want to get the most or the best out of your employees, you need to look at them as individuals and get to know them and build a relationship, because that's how you make people more. You improve their performance, the loyalty. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Now, today, everyone is under one kind of stress or another. And I think one of the issues that you address in your work, which I found particularly interesting, is what you refer to as energy management versus time management. How can managers better manage their energy? Can you talk about this a bit?
Yeah. To start with, I mean, there are all kinds of courses or seminars that you can take on time management. But I think you can never manage time. You can only manage how you use it. And you need to have the energy to be able to make the best use of your time. And you can, think about yourself as a lamp or a tank or whatever, and you have to fill it to, keep running. And energy can be both physical energy, mental energy, spiritual energy. There's all kinds of energy that you can look into. And if we talk about the physical energy, because many managers and leaders, have maybe long working, maybe not really taking good care of their sleep or their exercising or their diet. They want to do it, but they just don't give themselves the time or the space to do so. That affects their energy in the workplace and how they approach people. And, it affects their communication style if their physical energy is low. Same with cognitive or mental energy, because if you're multitasking and have, long to-do lists and, all those tabs open in your computer, that can drain your cognitive energy and you will have harder time focusing. So sometimes it's better to, when you're managing your energy, to have, fewer things in front of you at any given time, because multitasking is only gonna, it's going to take longer time to finish everything that you're working on, every project. So all this myth about multitasking, I think we need to kind of put that aside. And especially women that have taken pride in being good at multitasking and making fun of men that cannot do it. I think we should stop that, because our energy level, like I said, whether it's physical, cognitive, mental, spiritual, all kinds of energy, we would just come better in relationships or in communication. We will be, finishing our projects in a shorter time. So part of this is just taking good care of yourself. And it's what I like to call, good self-leadership. Just set boundaries, take good care of yourself, be the best that you can be. It's a phrase, but I think it applies here, because you can, there's limit to how much you can squeeze out of things. So you have to renew your energy. You cannot renew time because time passes, but you can constantly renew your energy. So if you're going into challenging conversation or working on a challenging project, you have to kind of fill your tank before, work on your energy, take good care of yourself. Or after you had a challenging conversation, you have to think about how can I renew my energy before I go into next conversation. So you don't go into new conversations or new projects being drained of energy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. So, I mean, even though we have been learning over the last few years or decades about how to manage our time, I think we can manage how we use our time, but time passes and then it's gone. But our energy, we can renew, whether it's between days or between even hours. And stress comes into this because just one good tip that I sometimes give people that I work with regarding energy and stress is just take 3 deep breaths. And it takes a few seconds, but once you have taken 3 deep breaths, like down to your belly, you kind of lower your cortisol, which is kind of the stress hormone. So, and that renews your energy. Instead of being like a hamster, running around all day with no energy, just out of strong will. I mean, everything that you do will not be as good as it could be if you had your energy or, if you have taken good care of yourself. So it affects you and the people that you work with and the projects that you're working on in so many ways.
I agree with you 100%. And I mean, I grew up in, I don't know if you'd call it an era or maybe it's just a subset of when and where I grew up, but there was definitely a very high priority placed on being hyper productive. And like you said, did you really get more done, or did you just burn yourself out and maybe not do things as effectively? I think that it's interesting that you bring up the downside to multitasking, because I can see that in my own productivity, that I end up getting less done actually when I'm trying to do multiple things at once.
Yeah, I think we are so good at being busy, but we are not as good at being productive.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think we have to kind of make the distinction between, are we busy or are we productive? And I think we become more productive by being less busy.
Yes.
And that has to do with the energy management as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. You're right. People don't stop to think about if they're actually being productive, or are they just,
Right.
like you said, like a hamster on a wheel, running like mad, but getting nowhere.
True. And especially now with hybrid working and everything, many organizations are thinking quite a lot about if their people are productive. And it's interesting to see how they're thinking more of it now when people are working, hybrid, than when people were working on site.
Right.
They were not measuring productivity to the extent that they want to measure it now with people working hybrid. And I find that quite interesting to, when I meet, because I'm working as a consultant and executive coach. And I recently was called into a company, just a short story. And they asked me, can you help us measure the productivity of people working remotely? So I asked them back, how are you measuring the productivity of people working on site? And they said, well, we are not doing that. And I said, then why are you going to measure the productivity of people working remote? I mean, it should either both groups are working for you. And they were just quite puzzled, because they said, I mean, we see people, they are on site, we see them, so they must be working. And I said, well, it's quite easy to look busy and look like you're running around with papers in your hands or something, but you never know what they're doing. And they could just be, fooling around. I mean, they could be doing whatever, and you don't know if they're productive. So I think I thought that's quite an interesting conversation that I had there.
Yeah, and it's a challenge for companies, because I think that when at least you see people, you do have a sense that they may not be very productive, but at least they're not doing something completely different than the work they're supposed to be doing. Whereas when they're offsite, oftentimes people wonder, well, we don't even know what they're doing all day.
Right. But I think that's something that, because we started talking about the challenges that managers and leaders are facing nowadays. And I think part of that is just how you design the work.
Right.
And I think it's about time to kind of redesign. So it should not be a matter of roles or jobs, rather about the tasks or the project. Because I think it's easier to manage people that are working remotely if you kind of break their job or their role into tasks and assignments. And then it's easier to kind of follow up on how things are going, instead of having it just like as a one big black hole that you have this job or you have this role. And so I think it's a matter of, we need to redesign how we work and how we look at jobs. I think we are quite stuck, in the second industrial revolution regarding how we work, but we are living the fourth.
Right.
We are still, many managers are stuck in the idea of having everyone show up at the same time in the morning and everybody go home at the same time in the afternoon, when there's no need for that, because we are working so differently, especially knowledge workers.
Right.
So at least in that, for knowledge workers, I think it's an extreme need for redesigning how we work.
So I think if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're suggesting then is, rather than measuring people's, I don't want to say productivity, contribution by hours, maybe it's more about defining deliverables.
Absolutely. I think, this, us being so stuck in thinking about hours, I think that also goes back to the second industrial revolution, because you can have an employee doing so much, creating so much value, or finishing all kinds of things in 1 hour that is more valuable than you would be willing to pay as an hourly rate. So I think we have to think about the deliverables or the value that employees are creating instead of the hours that they put in.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concept. And I think that it's something that a lot of companies maybe understand conceptually, but haven't been able to figure out how to implement, especially across a wide variety of roles. So it will be interesting to see how this goes forward.
Yeah, I'm not saying, and I don't think it will be easy, but I think it's something that we have to do. And I think we should look at the opportunities in this, whether we're thinking about, opportunities of value for the organizations or the individuals. I think it can go hand in hand because, like I said, it's a matter of the deliverables or the value, not the hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like we are going into daycare when we go to work. We are going into work to deliver something, to create some value, to be of service. And we should be able to measure that, to what's the value behind that, instead of measuring just the hours that you put in.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. Now, you talk about something that you refer to as your heart-based model for leadership. Mm-hmm. What's the concept behind that? Can you explain how leaders might implement this?
I think it goes back to some of the things that we talked about earlier about, human beings management and being more humane in your approach to this. This model of mine, I sometimes refer to it as heart-based because I'm trying to have, leaders and managers look in the mirror, look within. This is self-leadership that I mentioned. I also sometimes refer to this as like 360-degree leadership model, because in this model I showcase, various areas of one's life, and it's a matter of career, finances, health, relationships, and other issues. And managers and leaders and people in the workplaces are so busy with doing well in their career that other parts of this model, don't get enough focus. And I say that you're not really a successful person, even though you're doing well at work, if everything at home or in your finances or in your health is just going down the drain. So this model is all about creating this balance or healthy integration between work and life. I'm not a big fan of this talk about work-life balance. I'm more interested in talking about healthy work-life integration, because it's always going to be interlinked. And it's going to affect, like I said, your relationships, your finances, your health, your everything. So this model is about finding the balance and to be successful in all aspects of the model at the same time. So you should not be, say, I'm going to take the next 5 or 10 years to climb the corporate ladder and be so successful at work, and let everything else, be on a pause at the same time. We have to do this, work on all aspects at the same time. That's how we become successful.
I like the way you framed that, because I think that you're right. Calling it work-life balance has put people, in some cases, in a mindset where they're not really adaptable to the fact that sometimes work has to become a bigger percent of what you do, and other aspects of your life have to take up more. They sort of think of it as, I'm only going to work X number of hours a day. So I think you've sort of put it in a framework that enables flexibility.
Yeah. And that goes also back to how we need to redesign work. And flexibility is one of the things that when people are going for job interviews nowadays, one of the first things that they ask about is how much flexibility is there, or, can I choose my hours, or when or where I work, etc. So, it's a matter of redesigning and this integration of work and life, especially with all the technology. Many people, not all, but so many people, you're at home in the afternoon or in the evening, and you are answering maybe some job-related emails, might be even taking some phone calls or reading something to prepare for work. And at the same time, during the kind of typical working hours, you may have to take like a personal phone call. You may need to take your kid to a doctor or something. So you need the flexibility during those typical working hours. But at the same time, you may need to do some work-related things during kind of off typical working hours. So it's a matter of integration and find ways so both the employer and employee get the most out of this relationship.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. Now, just one last question. Based on your experience, what do you see as the biggest trend going forward in human capital, and how might that impact organizations?
Yeah, we've touched upon some of it regarding the everything becoming more human, but also that there's rethinking how we work. After the pandemic, usually when people go into some kind of trauma, and we can talk about the pandemic as trauma, people reevaluate how they want to work and how they want to live. So the biggest trend now, I think, has to do with so many things that we've been talking about, redesigning work, rethinking how we work. And there's also part of this big trend is that it's just changing how people are not applying as much for jobs as they did before. And workplaces are complaining that they need more talent. So companies need now, rather to source talent than attract talent, because even though you're trying to attract talent, they may not apply. So, and with the individualism, people want to kind of be discovered. So it's a matter of different approach to how we do recruitment and hiring. And part of that is what has been called EVP, or employer value proposition, because talent, especially people with good experience and good knowledge, they can choose between where they want to work. So the employers have to really be clear on what's in it for me, what's in it for the employees to work there. And that is the trend, or this shift, kind of, it's like a power shift within the labor market, which related to this trend, is that before, the workplaces had all the power. They put out the ad, they had people apply, they interviewed, and they choose who they wanted to let in. But now the talent is choosing where they want to work. They have the power now. They can choose where they want to work. And if they take on a job, they use the first few days or few weeks to evaluate, is this a manager that I want to work for? Does this workplace have a healthy workplace culture? Am I supported as an individual? And if talent finds this not to be fulfilled, they just leave and go somewhere else. So that is kind of the trend, this power shift, this change in how we evaluate, or the value that we put onto our own time. So we may want to work fewer hours, but that does not mean that we want to create less value or be less show less productivity for our employer. We just want to do it differently. So that is all part of this trend. So when we redesign work, we maybe can work fewer hours, but still deliver the same value. So maybe not a direct answer to your question, but there's just so many kind of shifts and changes going on in the labor market, in how people want to work, and how workplaces have to attract and retain talent. And like I said, they have to more go into sourcing than typical recruitment process.
I think what you're saying is very true. And I think that there's been a lot of changes, partially brought on by the pandemic, partially probably by other things as well. And that it has caused everybody to rethink and reevaluate and test different models, not necessarily having to just pick a model and go with it, but perhaps experiment and see what works best within the framework of your company and the work that you need to get done.
Yeah, because you asked about, trends in this area that we've been talking about, but we can talk about other trends as, technology development, globalization. We are living longer than before, so increased longevity. So all kinds of things that are changing, kind of like macro trends that are changing, but that is also going to affect workplaces and how people want to work. So some of it we see maybe as threats, and some of it we see as opportunities. But I think we can find opportunities in all of this. So when we talk about technology and how that is developing, we see opportunities for the workplaces of creating even more value or doing even more. But we should also try to find the opportunity of maybe working less, but increasing the same value, or creating the same value. So be both beneficial for the workplaces and also for the individuals.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah, should go hand in hand.
I would agree with that. And I think it's right now, in a sense, everybody's in that learning phase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, there's just so many shifts going on and so many changes. We don't know how they will settle, or like we are still going through the pandemic, and how are things going to settle after that? And maybe things never quite settle because there's this constant change going on. And I think we should kind of welcome all those changes and just find the ways to use this energy or this dynamics to create even more value, both for workplaces and for individuals. Whether we talk about this as monetary value or value in having more time for ourselves to build stronger relationships with our families or our friends. And the better that we do in our personal life, the better we become at work. Because if we have time for ourselves to build good relationships, we even become more creative when we come into work. So complex problem solving has been stated as one of the most important skills nowadays, because how everything is changing. And complex problem solving is a lot about creativity. And if you don't have any energy, and if you're, don't have quality of life, your creativity is going down. And then we will not be as good as solving those complex problems. So that's why I always talk about this integration of working life. The better we do in our personal life, the better we will do at work.
I think those are very good points. And I want to thank you so much for sharing all of these insights and bringing things up that we hadn't really thought about before, or at least I hadn't really thought about before from that point of view. Now, where can people find you? How can they connect with you, Herdis?
Yeah, the best way is to find me on LinkedIn. It's my name, Herdis Pala Palsdottir. You can probably put it in because it's hard to hear due to the pronunciation. And there they can find info about my website and what I'm doing. Because I'm working on several projects and have several websites. So LinkedIn is kind of probably the best one source to look at me.
Well, that's perfect. I will definitely put the links in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and inviting me to the show.
Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I would love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. Don't forget to check out our podcast website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. If there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me and being part of our international community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.